I was locking up my mother's diner for the last time when it happened. The wind outside howled against the windows, the kind of bitter Montana cold that always made my mother say winter had a way of testing a person's soul. Mine felt scraped bare. Tomorrow morning, the bank would come for the keys, and Carver's Corner, the little diner she built with her own hands, would no longer belong to me. I moved through the darkened room, slowly touching every chair, every corner of the counter, where I spent my childhood doing homework while Mom worked the grill. Each step felt like lowering a curtain on a life I never imagined losing. When I reached the front door, I paused with my hand on the deadbolt. I wanted one more breath in the place that still smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon, one more moment to say goodbye. But before I could turn the lock, the door swung inward with a rush of icy air, and two men stepped inside from the snow. They looked completely out of place in my dying diner. Dark wool coats, polished shoes, faces set with something intense and unreadable. They did not glance at the menu or take a seat. They simply watched me as if seeing someone they had searched for a very long time. The taller one stepped forward. Snow melted on his shoulders as he stood there, and when he spoke, his voice was steady but carried a tremor beneath it. "Emily." My breath caught. "Do you remember the freezing night 20 years ago I felt the room tilt?" I tried to answer, but my voice disappeared. He took another step closer. "You shared your last bread with two boys." The words dropped between us like a spark in the dark. His expression tightened, not with anger, but with something raw, something almost painful. "We were those boys." I stood motionless, hand still on the door, unable to feel the cold anymore. The only thing I felt was my heart pounding as the past walked straight into my last night at the diner. The moment the two men spoke those words, the diner I thought I knew so well seemed to shift around me like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I should have asked them to sit or to explain, or at least to close the door before the cold swallowed the whole place. But instead, I found myself drifting back toward the counter, needing something solid to hold on to. The taller man gently pushed the door shut behind him, and the quiet click of the latch sounded far too final, as if the night had just split into a before and after I was not ready for. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that nothing about my life tonight made sense anyway. I was already saying goodbye to the last thing that tied me to my mother. What harm could two strangers possibly add? Yet as they watched me not with impatience or threat, but with an unsettling kind of recognition, I felt something old stirring inside me, a memory I had kept buried so deeply I sometimes wondered if it truly happened. I shook the thought away and forced my voice to emerge. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's been a long day, a long few years." The words came out too soft. I could hear how tired I was. I gestured vaguely around the room. "I'm closing up for good. Tomorrow the bank comes." The men exchanged a quick look, but neither interrupted. I kept talking partly because silence felt unbearable, partly because the truth had been pressing against my chest for months. My mother opened this place 32 years ago. She was barely older than I am now, and everyone thought she was out of her mind trying to run a diner alone in a town this small. But she made it work. She made everything work. I glanced at the empty stools lined up along the counter, remembering how she used to lean on the edge laughing with customers she knew by name, sliding plates of pancakes to truckers passing through, wiping down the same chrome she polished until the day she collapsed in the kitchen. I ran my thumb along the surface, now feeling the familiar groove where the metal had worn down. When she got sick, I promised her I'd keep this place going. I promised I wouldn't let it die. My throat tightened, but then the medical bills came, and after she passed, everything went downhill. I tried to smile, but it wavered. The pandemic hit us hard. Supply costs doubled, foot traffic disappeared, and every month felt like trying to put out a fire with a teaspoon of water. I maxed out credit cards, took loans I didn't understand. I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough. The shorter man stepped closer, his face softening with something that looked almost like sorrow. "You've been carrying this alone," he said. It wasn't a question. I brushed my palms against my jeans, embarrassed by how quickly his words pierced through me. People had offered sympathy before, but it was always vague, polite, the kind that slid off without leaving a mark. His tone was different. He spoke as if he knew the shape of loneliness, as if he recognized the weight on my shoulders because he had once carried it too. I tried to shrug it off. It's fine. Everyone in this town is struggling. I'm not special. But even as I said it, I felt a twist of pain in my chest. Because this diner was special. It was the smell of apple pie in the oven every fall. It was my mother's voice humming through the kitchen. It was the way she slipped a free sandwich to anyone who looked like they needed it, the way she whispered kindness into every corner of my childhood. And tomorrow morning, men in suits would walk in and erase all of it. The taller man took one slow step toward me. "Emily," he said quietly, as if he understood I was retreating somewhere inside myself. "You really don't remember us." I blinked hard, feeling something warm and painful rising in the back of my throat. "There was a freezing night," I said slowly. "A night when I was 8. 2 boys were sitting behind the diner." But my voice trailed off because the rest of the memory blurred into the snow and darkness and the small tremble of hunger in my stomach. I had spent years trying to convince myself it wasn't real that I had imagined giving away the bread my mother told me to save for later. I had never told anyone about that night, not even my mother after she whispered her approval. The moment felt too sacred, too fleeting, like a lantern flame cupped in my small hands. Something shifted in the taller man's expression, a kind of relief and grief braided together. Then he reached into his coat and placed a small folded paper bag on the counter. The same kind of bag my mother used for leftover bread. My breath caught. I had not seen one like it in 20 years. "You saved our lives that night," the shorter man said again, his voice steady but filled with a weight I could feel in my bones. I gripped the counter harder because the room felt suddenly too small, too full of ghosts and memories and questions I was not ready to ask. And for the first time since my mother died, I felt something inside me crack open as if the past I buried had finally come home. I was 8 years old the night the cold felt alive, a sharp breathing thing that slipped under doors and crawled across floors, no matter how tightly we tried to seal the windows. Montana winters had always been brutal, but that night the wind seemed to howl with intention, rattling the diner's metal vent like it was trying to claw its way in. My mother kept glancing toward the back door while she worked the grill, her shoulders tight, her lips drawn thin in a way I had only seen when she worried about something she would never tell me. It was near closing time just after 9. The last customer had gone home early, muttering something about the roads icing faster than usual, and my mother had handed me the last small loaf of warm bread she baked that day. It fit perfectly in my hands, wrapped in a thin paper bag to keep the heat in. "Save it for later, sweetheart," she said, brushing my bangs out of my eyes. "The roads are too icy for us to drive home tonight, so we'll stay in the storage room again." I nodded, even though I hated sleeping on the old cot in the back where I could hear the pipes groan and the heater click off and on. But when the snow piled up faster than she liked, Mom always insisted we stay put. That night, she looked more worried than usual. I carried the warm bread with me as I helped her wipe down tables. She hummed softly while she scrubbed the ketchup bottle, a tune I still remember but have never been able to name. When she hummed, I always felt safe. But the cold pressed harder against the windows, and somehow even her humming couldn't fill the strange heaviness in the air. After finishing my chores, I slipped into the back to dump the trash. Mom usually did it, but I had begged her earlier to let me help more because she looked so tired. She finally agreed, warning me not to stay outside long. I bundled up, tugging my pink hat over my ears as the back door creaked open. The world behind the diner was swallowed in white, the snow falling so thick I could barely see the alley. The dumpster stood like a dark shape half buried in drifts. I took 3 steps out and the cold slammed into me, stealing my breath. I hurried, dumping the trash bag as fast as I could. I was about to race back inside when I heard a sound, a small, whimpering noise almost lost in the wind. I froze. Mom always said to trust my instincts, and something in that sound tugged at me. I turned toward the far corner where the building met the fence, a patch of shadow deeper than the rest. I squinted through the swirling flakes, and then I saw them. 2 boys huddled close together, sitting against the brick wall with their knees pulled to their chests. Their clothes looked thin, barely more than layers of shirts and torn jackets. Snow clung to their hair and sleeves. The older one had his arm wrapped around the younger, trying to shield him from the wind. His eyes met mine wide and frightened, but also strangely hopeful, as if he were afraid to believe what he was seeing. For a moment, I couldn't move. I knew about homeless people. Mom always gave them coffee and never let them leave without something warm to eat. But I had never seen children alone in the cold. The younger boy whimpered again, his face buried in the older one's coat. I stepped closer, gripping the warm loaf under my arm. "Are you okay?" I asked, though I knew they weren't. The older boy swallowed hard. His lips were almost white. "We're cold," his voice cracked, "and hungry." I looked down at the bread. It was the only food we had left for the night. Mom had made it special because she knew I loved it warm. She always let me eat the last loaf because she said it made me sleep better. My stomach grumbled as if reminding me of that fact, but the two boys stared at the bag in my hands the way stray dogs sometimes looked at the plates Mom set outside for them. I pulled the loaf out of the bag. It steamed lightly, the last bit of warmth fading into the night air. The older boy's eyes flicked to it and then away like he was ashamed to want it. I tore it in half and held one piece out to him. He hesitated, his gaze darting toward the back door as if afraid someone would yell at him. Then he took it gently, almost reverently, like I had handed him something precious instead of half a loaf of bread. He whispered, "Thank you." I looked at the younger boy trembling in his arms. Something in my chest tightened. Before I could second-guess myself, I handed over the other half. "Here. It's okay." His eyes widened as he grabbed it with both hands, biting into it like he hadn't eaten in days. Maybe he hadn't. The older boy watched him, relief softening his face. "You sure?" he asked. "You don't want any." I shook my head, though my stomach pinched painfully. I'll be fine." "You need it more." The older boy's voice went quiet. "What's your name?" "Emily," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "I'm Ethan. And this is Lucas." Lucas looked up with crumbs on his lips, then gave a shy smile before burying his face back into the bread. For some reason, that tiny smile warmed me more than the loaf had. I don't know how long we stood there. The snow kept falling harder, stinging my cheeks, and I realized I needed to get back inside before Mom panicked. I pointed to the back door. "You should come in," I said. "It's warm." But the older boy shook his head quickly, fear flashing in his eyes. "No, no, adults. Please, we're fine. Thank you." He tugged Lucas closer, and something in their posture told me they were used to hiding, used to running. I didn't want to leave them. Something felt wrong about stepping back into warmth and leaving them in the freezing dark. But I was 8 and the cold was getting unbearable. I whispered that I would come back and hurried toward the door. Before I slipped inside, I glanced back one more time. They were still there, huddled together, eating the last bread my mother ever baked that night. Then the snow swallowed them again. And by the time Mom and I returned minutes later, carrying blankets and hot soup, the corner was empty. The boys were gone, as if the storm had taken them. I carried that moment for years without knowing if they lived or if the bread had been the last warm thing they ever held. When we stepped back inside the diner, the warmth hit me so fast it made my eyes sting. Mom shut the door behind us, brushing snow off my shoulders, her hands moving quickly, almost anxiously. "You were out there too long, sweetheart. I told you the wind is dangerous tonight." But her voice shifted when she saw my face. She knelt down so we were eye level, her palms cupping my cheeks the way she always did when she needed to read me like a book. "What happened?" I swallowed, still catching my breath. "There were 2 boys," I whispered, "behind the dumpster. They were so cold and hungry." The words tumbled out in a way I could not control, spilling over each other, messy and panicked. I told her about their thin jackets, about the way the younger one shook so hard I thought his teeth might break. I told her about giving them the bread, all of it. Her hands paused mid-motion, and for a moment I braced myself for the scolding I expected. Bread was valuable on nights like this. It was all we had left. Instead, something softened in her eyes, something that warmed me in a way the heater never could. "You gave them everything," she said quietly. Her voice held no anger, only awe. I nodded slowly. "I knew the bread was for me," I said, "but they looked so scared, and he told me they were hungry. I didn't know what else to do. Mom pulled me into her arms, holding me tight, her breath warm against my hair. You did the right thing, Emily. You did the brave thing. I felt a strange mix of pride and guilt twist inside me, but her steady heartbeat calmed it, convincing me for a moment that maybe I had made the right choice. After a minute, she stood grabbing 2 blankets from the storage shelf. "Come on," she said. "Let's go find them." We hurried back outside, the cold biting harder now. Snowflakes clung to her hair as she called out into the alley. "Boys, boys, it's okay. We have food. We have blankets." But her voice disappeared into the wind. The corner where I'd found them was now only snow and shadow. No footprints, no movement. Nothing but the distant hum of the storm. Mom tried again, louder this time, but the storm swallowed everything. "They must have wandered off," she said, her voice tight in a way that made me clutch her coat sleeve. I knew she was trying not to scare me, but worry poured off her like heat from the kitchen grill. We stayed outside for several more minutes, calling, searching, scanning every dark corner of the alley, but the boys were gone. By the time we stepped back inside, my fingers were numb, and Mom's expression had changed into something I rarely saw, a mix of fear, grief, and helplessness. She sat me down on a stool by the counter and wrapped my hands in a towel warmed by the heater. Then she crouched again, her eyes locked on mine, her hands firm but gentle. "Emily, listen to me." Her voice was calm, too. Calm, the kind she used only when she needed me to hear every word. "What you did tonight matters. Even if you never see those boys again. Even if we never know what happened to them." Her breath trembled just slightly, but her eyes stayed steady. Kindness has a strange way of finding its way back. Maybe not soon, maybe not in a way you expect, but someday. I frowned, confused. "How do you know?" She smiled, brushing her thumb across my cheek. "Because the world is much colder without it, and because one day, when you least expect it, someone will remember what you did and it will matter more than you can imagine." I didn't fully understand her then. I just nodded and leaned into her, letting her wrap me in her warmth as the storm raged outside. She held me for a long time, longer than she usually had time for on busy nights. And though I could not explain it, some part of me sensed that she was giving me a memory she hoped I would carry long after she was gone. That night, as we lay on the old cot in the storage room listening to the wind batter the walls, I whispered into the dark, "I hope they're okay." Mom squeezed my hand. "They will be," she said softly, "because of you." I wanted to believe her. I tried to picture the boys somewhere warm, somewhere safe, but a small ache settled in my chest, an ache that stayed with me for years. And it wasn't until 20 years later, when 2 men walked into my dying diner with snow in their hair and recognition in their eyes, that I finally understood what my mother meant. The moment the memory of that night faded, I found myself staring again at the 2 men standing in front of me, their coats dripping melted snow onto the old tile floor. The diner felt too quiet, as if every sound had folded inward, waiting for whatever would happen next. The taller man, the one who had spoken first, stepped forward just enough for the light above the counter to catch his face. Something about his eyes tugged at a place deep inside me, a place I didn't know was still tender. "We never forgot your face," he said softly. The words felt impossible. I gripped the counter for balance. The shorter man set the small paper bag gently beside me. "You saved our lives that night." My throat tightened a slow constriction that made it hard to breathe. I opened the bag with shaking fingers, half expecting the impossible, but of course it was empty, only faint crumbs, and the lingering smell of old flour, like a ghost of the bread I once held. "Why did you keep this?" I whispered. The shorter man's voice was quiet but steady, "Because it was the first warm thing we held in days." The taller man added, "And because it reminded us someone cared." Those words hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I pressed my palm to the counter's edge, grounding myself in the familiar scratch of the worn surface. The taller man watched me with an expression that seemed almost afraid, as if he worried I would turn them away or tell them they were mistaken. But I wasn't mistaken. I was 8 again, standing in the snow, holding a warm loaf between my hands while 2 boys looked at me like I was offering them the world. "It's you," I murmured. Ethan and Lucas. Their names tasted strange on my tongue after 20 years of silence. The shorter man, Lucas, gave a small, grateful smile. You remembered. I don't know how long we stood there. The diner hummed softly behind us, the old refrigerator clicking on the heater rattling in the ceiling, the ghosts of my mother's laughter echoing faintly in the corner of my mind. Finally, I managed to speak. Why are you here now, after all this time? Ethan glanced at Lucas, then back at me. His voice was low, careful, as if each word carried weight. We came to find you, because we heard about the foreclosure. We didn't want to be too late. I blinked, confused. How did you even know where to look? Lucas stepped forward, his hands tucked nervously into his coat pockets. We spent years trying, actually. We didn't know your last name. Only your face, and the diner, and the bread. We checked town records, local businesses, old newspaper mentions. When we found out your mother passed, his voice trailed off, respectful, and something warm pressed behind my ribs. I lowered my eyes. It has been a hard few years. I'm sorry you had to learn it from strangers. Ethan's expression tightened. We should have come sooner. We didn't know how. There was so much we didn't understand back then. We ran from a lot, Emily. We hid from everything. For a long time, I thought I imagined the boys that night, I said quietly. Or that maybe you froze before anyone could help you. I thought about you more than I should have. The admission slipped out before I could stop it. Lucas's eyes softened. We thought about you too. More than you know. The heater clicked loudly, startling all three of us. The diner's lights flickered and buzzed the way they always did in winter, and I suddenly realized how small the two men made the room feel. They weren't just tall. They were substantial, like people who carried whole histories on their backs. Ethan studied the room, his gaze drifting across the faded photographs, the chipped mugs hanging above the counter, the empty pie display. This place meant something to you, he said, not as a question, but as a truth he already knew. It meant everything. His eyes returned to mine, and for a moment I felt something shift between us, something quiet but unmistakable, a recognition neither of us spoke aloud. Lucas rested a hand on the counter, fingers brushing the worn spot my mother had polished bare. You fought hard to keep it, I could tell. But you didn't have anyone fighting with you. His words landed painfully. I hated how accurate they felt. I cleared my throat. What do you want from me? Ethan took one step closer, his voice firm but gentle. We didn't come here to take anything. We came here because you once gave two kids a chance to survive a night they shouldn't have survived, Lucas added. And we're here now because it's our turn to help you. The room wavered, slightly blurred at the edges. I gripped the counter again, needing something real to hold on to. I didn't know what these men planned or why they had crossed half the country to find me, but one thing was certain. The night I thought would be the end of everything was about to become something else entirely. For a long moment, we stood in a triangle of silence, the kind that feels almost sacred, stretched between what had been lost and what had somehow found its way back. I kept expecting one of them to say something that would break the spell, something that would make all of this suddenly make sense, but instead, Ethan simply looked at me with a steady, searching calm that made my skin warm despite the cold clinging to their coats. I cleared my throat again, trying to gather myself. You said you ran from a lot back then. Where did you end up? Lucas let out a breath that might have been a quiet laugh, though it held no humor. Everywhere, he said, and nowhere that wanted us. We bounced around shelters at first. Some nights we slept in laundromats, some nights behind grocery stores where the vents blew warm air. One winter, we lived in a church basement with 70 other people. He rubbed the back of his neck as if remembering the weight of those nights. But eventually, someone reported us wandering alone, and that's when Child Services found us. He said the words simply without bitterness, but the calmness in his tone only made the truth sharper. Ethan's jaw tightened as he picked up the story. We were placed in foster care, a lot of different homes, most temporary, some good, some not. His voice thinned slightly on the last word, and the silence that followed said more than any explanation could. I didn't speak. I didn't want to interrupt whatever he was gathering the strength to share, but I felt something inside me sink painfully. I tried to picture the boys I had seen that night, small and shaking, navigating a world that didn't have room for them. Ethan looked at the floor for a moment before continuing. We got separated once for almost a year. I was 12. Lucas was 10. It was one of the worst years of my life, and I made sure it never happened again. After that, we stayed together no matter what. I looked between them, suddenly aware of the closeness in their posture, the way they seemed to move like two parts of the same story. And how did you go from that to this? I asked softly, gesturing at the expensive coats, the quiet confidence, the strange gravity they carried. I didn't mean to sound rude, but the leap between their past and their present was staggering. Lucas smiled a small but honest curve of his mouth. A lot of luck, a lot of stubbornness, and a few people who believed in us when they didn't have to. Ethan nodded. We aged out of the system at 18 with nothing but a backpack each and enough saved from part-time jobs to live in a one-room apartment with a broken heater. But we had each other, and we had the memory of that night. He didn't have to clarify which night. I felt my chest tighten again, that strange warm ache returning. It wasn't the bread itself, Ethan continued. It was the way you looked at us. Like we weren't invisible, like we mattered. It was the first time I remember feeling human. I swallowed hard. I hadn't known 8-year-old me had carried the power to give something so large. I was just a kid sharing the only thing I had. Lucas leaned his elbows lightly on the counter, studying the old photos pinned along the wall. We didn't know your name. We didn't know how to say thank you. But we made ourselves a promise that night. If we ever made it out, if we ever became more than what the world expected, we'd come back for the girl who helped us survive a night we might not have survived alone. The words felt surreal, almost cinematic, except nothing in their faces hinted at exaggeration. Ethan straightened his gaze, sharpening slightly. I started working construction, then small repair jobs, then bigger ones. I learned how to build things, how to fix what was broken. Eventually, I started a contracting company. It took off faster than I expected. 6 years later, I sold it and used the money to build a tech firm focused on construction logistics. Turned out the industry was ready for innovation. His understatement almost made me laugh. I had read about a man named Ethan Hale without ever connecting him to the boy I once fed behind our diner. Hale Systems, if I remembered correctly. A company worth more than I could mentally comprehend. You're that Ethan Hale, I said quietly. He gave a small shrug, almost embarrassed. I still feel like that kid behind the dumpster some days. Titles don't mean much. Lucas lifted his chin slightly as though taking his turn. I worked through school while Ethan was building his first company. I was good with numbers. Really good. I ended up in finance. Risk management first, then venture analytics. Eventually, I shifted into philanthropic asset management. It's nicer helping people than squeezing profit out of them. He grinned a little. Though the money's not bad either. Their success stories should have felt distant mythic, the kind of thing that lived in magazines and newspapers, but standing here with them in the dim light of my dying diner, they seemed completely real. Not untouchable, not flawless. Just two men who had clawed their way out of impossible circumstances and somehow done the unthinkable. I let out a slow breath. I don't understand, I finally said. People with your level of success? You could be anywhere. You could be doing anything. Why come back here? Ethan stepped closer, the quiet sincerity in his voice making the space between us hum. Because we would not be here without you. Lucas nodded. You think you only gave us bread, Emily, but you gave us proof that kindness exists, and that proof carried us through a lot of dark places. Their words settled into me slowly like warm water soaking into chilled skin. I had spent years feeling like everything I touched fell apart, that I had let my mother down, let the diner down, let myself down. And yet here were two men telling me that one small act from a freezing night 20 years ago had been enough to alter the trajectory of their entire lives. It didn't seem possible. It didn't seem real. But the sincerity on their faces left no space for doubt. I leaned back against the counter, feeling something fragile inside me shift, as if a door I had closed long ago was cracking open. So you came back to tell me thank you? Ethan shook his head slowly. No. We came back because now it's our turn. The room seemed to tighten around us, the air charged with something just beginning to reveal itself. Whatever they were about to say next, I knew it would change everything. For a heartbeat, I thought I had misheard him. The diner felt too quiet, too small, too fragile to hold whatever those words meant. The heater hummed overhead, the neon sign outside flickered against the window, and still I stood frozen, staring at Ethan as if the right angle might reveal the answer. Your turn, I repeated slowly, unsure I wanted to understand. Lucas reached into his coat and pulled out a slim leather folder, the kind I had only seen bankers and lawyers carry. He placed it gently on the counter between us as though setting down something delicate, something alive. Before I could open it, Ethan said, "Emily, what we're about to tell you may feel overwhelming. But everything in this folder was done legally, respectfully, and with the intention of giving you back what was taken from you." My chest tightened. I looked down at the folder, then back at them. "What was taken from me?" Lucas nodded toward the papers. "The diner, your mother's legacy, your home. All of it." A cold wave of confusion washed over me. I shook my head instinctively, almost defensively. "No, that's not something anyone can just give back. The bank owns it now. They're taking it in the morning." "Not anymore," Ethan said quietly. "We bought it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I blinked once, twice. My thoughts scattered like loose receipts across a counter. You bought what?" "The diner." Ethan repeated, his voice steady. "The building. The land it sits on. The outstanding debt. All of it. Every penny." My heartbeat thudded unevenly in my ears. I stared at them, trying to force their faces into focus. This had to be a joke, some cruel misunderstanding of the situation, or maybe grief playing tricks on me. I laughed once, a short, brittle sound. "That's not possible. You can't just walk in here and fix 20 years of my mistakes. You don't even know what this place owes." "Actually," Lucas said softly, "we do. And you didn't make mistakes. You survived circumstances no one was prepared for." He opened the folder, turning it toward me. There were deeds, receipts, bank transfer confirmations, legal documents stamped and initialed. My name appeared on more than one line, and yet nothing made sense. I took a step back, shaking my head again. "No, I can't accept this." Ethan moved around the counter slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. He didn't touch me, didn't even come close, but his presence steadied me in a way I didn't want to admit. "Emily, listen. When you found us that night, we had nothing. No food, no shelter, no one looking for us. We were two kids the world had forgotten. Until you." Lucas added, "You were the first person who looked at us like we were human, like we were worth saving. You didn't hesitate. You didn't wait to ask who we were or what we'd done. You just gave us everything you had, even though it meant you went hungry." My breath trembled. I didn't know what to say. Ethan took a slow breath. "That kind of kindness doesn't fade. It grows. It shaped who we became. It shaped every decision we made after that night." "And when we heard what happened to your mother," he paused, his jaw tightening in grief he still carried. "And when we learned what happened to the diner," Lucas continued softly, "we knew it was time. Time to do what we promised ourselves when we were still boys, shivering behind your mother's back door. Time to give back what was given to us." I pressed both hands to the counter, trying to steady myself. "Why would you do all this for me now, after 20 years?" The question felt small, weak compared to everything swirling inside me. Ethan met my eyes fully, and for a moment the world narrowed to the two of us standing in the dim light of a place that had shaped both our lives. Because he said, his voice roughening at the edges, "You were the first person who ever treated us like we mattered, and people who matter should not lose everything they love." Lucas smiled softly, a smile that held nothing but sincerity. "You didn't save just our lives that night, Emily. You saved the parts of us that believed people could be good. We owe you more than we can ever repay." My vision blurred. I blinked hard, refusing to cry, but tears betrayed me anyway, slipping down my cheeks before I could stop them. I covered my face with one hand, overwhelmed. Ethan's voice softened. "You don't have to decide anything tonight, but as of this moment, Carver's Corner belongs to you again, free and clear. And if you want help rebuilding it, reopening it, or transforming it into something new, we're here. If you want to walk away and start over somewhere else, we'll support that too. This isn't a demand, Emily. It's a gift. One that you earned 20 years ago. I dropped my hand slowly, my breathing uneven. You're giving me back my life. Ethan shook his head. No. We're giving you back the choice you never should have lost. The heater hummed overhead. Snow tapped against the window. For the first time in years, the diner didn't feel like a dying place. It felt like it had a heartbeat again. For several seconds after Ethan finished speaking, I couldn't move. The diner around me seemed to bend under the weight of everything that had just shifted, as if the walls themselves were adjusting to a future they hadn't dared imagine. I felt lightheaded, unsteady, like a thread pulled loose from a tapestry and suddenly floating in the air. I reached blindly for the counter to ground myself, but the counter felt different too, as if it no longer carried only the burden of everything I had lost, but the promise of something being returned. I finally managed to speak, though my voice came out thin. I don't know what to say. Lucas smiled gently, sliding the folder closer to me. You don't have to say anything yet. Just breathe. It was strange how such a simple suggestion felt like a lifeline. Breathing had not come naturally for a long time. I exhaled slowly, the knot in my chest loosening just enough for air to move. The men waited patiently, neither rushing me nor filling the silence. The silence itself felt warm. Eventually, I straightened and wiped my cheeks with my sleeve, embarrassed by how quickly I had unraveled. I'm not used to people helping me, I admitted softly. I'm used to fighting for everything alone. Ethan leaned his hands on the back of a stool, his posture calm but intent. That's why we're here. You shouldn't have had to carry this alone. He said it with a sincerity that made something inside me tremble. Lucas added, and you're not alone anymore. The words echoed strangely through me, settling in a place I hadn't realized was hollow. I opened the folder again, scanning the documents with slightly steadier eyes. Every number, every signature, every stamped approval felt unreal. They weren't just offering help, they had already done the impossible. The diner was mine again. My mother's legacy was safe, but there was another question that pressed at me, quiet but persistent. What do you want me to do with all this? What happens next? Lucas exchanged a glance with Ethan before answering. That depends on you. If you want to reopen the diner, we'll help. If you want to expand it, renovate it, or build something entirely new, we'll help with that too. Ethan nodded. We're not here to take control. We're here to support whatever future you choose. The phrase, whatever future you choose, struck me more deeply than I expected. For years, my future had not felt like mine at all. It had been a series of obligations, debts, and survival decisions. Now standing in the dim glow of the diner lights, I felt something unfamiliar blooming inside me. Possibility. I leaned back, resting my hands on the counter behind me. If I did reopen the diner, it would need work. A lot of work. The grill clogs constantly. The fridge door barely seals. The wiring is old. The bathrooms need repairing. The list was endless, and I heard the exhaustion in my own voice. Ethan's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Then let's start with that. The next morning, word spread through the town faster than winter wind. I didn't know how the rumor reached so many people so quickly, but by 8 o'clock, the diner's parking lot was full of trucks and cars, some belonging to neighbors I hadn't seen in months. Others to people who had no reason to come except to help rebuild something that belonged to all of us in ways I never fully understood. Maria Lopez, who had waitressed for my mother 20 years ago, knocked on the door before I could unlock it. Heard you might need staff again, she said with a hopeful grin. I'm between jobs. I can start today. Before I could answer, she stepped aside, and 3 more familiar faces appeared behind her, each carrying toolboxes, paint cans, or thermoses of hot coffee. Inside, Ethan and Lucas had already rolled up their sleeves. For men whose lives were polished and successful, they seemed strangely at home in the dust and clutter of my broken diner. Ethan inspected the grill with practiced eyes, running his fingers along the vents and valves. I expected him to look out of place, but instead he looked grounded, almost comfortable. Years in construction before tech, he said when he caught me staring. I haven't forgotten how to fix things. Lucas, meanwhile, sat up at a corner table with a laptop spreadsheets already open. We'll allocate funds for repairs, he explained. Labor volunteers or discounted where possible. Equipment upgrades here, operational expenses here. His efficiency was almost hypnotic, but what struck me even more was how often they both looked up at me, checking in, asking questions, making sure every decision reflected what I wanted. Not what they wanted, not what the town wanted. Me. As the hours passed, the diner transformed. Photos were taken down and dusted. Tiles were scrubbed. The ancient heater was opened up and examined. Ethan crawled under countertops. Lucas negotiated reduced prices with suppliers on the phone. Maria organized volunteers, greeting every new arrival with infectious warmth. And through all of it, I moved among them like someone relearning how to exist in a world that had room for hope. Several times I caught Ethan watching me, not in a way that pressed or pried. There was no romantic weight, no implication, just a quiet awareness, as if he was studying the way I carried my history, trying to understand it without stepping on it. Once, when the afternoon light slanted through the window and illuminated the dust motes drifting in the air, our eyes met longer than I expected. He didn't look away until I did. It left something warm and unfamiliar in my chest. Lucas, too, had a way of being near without intruding. Whenever I grew overwhelmed by logistics, by decisions, by the sudden shift from despair to possibility, he appeared beside me with calm explanations, steady guidance, or a gentle reminder to breathe. Neither man tried to claim space that wasn't theirs. They simply filled the empty spaces I had forgotten could be shared. By evening, we stood in the center of the diner, surrounded by boxes of new equipment, repair lists, and the hum of progress. I felt tired in a way that was strangely pleasant, the kind of tired that comes with movement rather than defeat. "This place is going to shine again," Maria said, lifting a stack of menus. "Just you wait." Ethan looked around, then at me. "It already does." I looked down at the folder still resting on the counter, the legal stamp confirming that the diner was mine again, free and clear. Something inside me shifted softly, like the click of a lock opening after years of rust. It was not love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was connection. Something warm and gentle and unexpected threading through the three of us in different ways. A beginning I hadn't asked for, but suddenly couldn't imagine losing. By the time the sun dipped behind the mountains, the diner was humming with a different kind of life, the kind I hadn't felt since my mother was alive. People filtered out slowly, waving goodnight, promising to return in the morning to keep working. Maria left last, flipping her ponytail over her shoulder and calling out that she'd bring muffins for everyone. And then it was just the three of us in the quiet, half-lit diner, the air warm with the lingering scent of coffee and fresh paint. I stood near the counter holding a clipboard full of notes I could barely process. My body felt both exhausted and weightless. Ethan and Lucas gathered their things, speaking quietly to each other. Their voices blended into the familiar creaks of the building as if the diner had already accepted them into its rhythm. Finally, they approached me. Lucas was the first to speak. "We'll head out for tonight. We have a few business calls to take and some arrangements to finalize back at the hotel." He hesitated before adding, "We won't be far." The assurance was simple, but I felt it settle around me like a blanket. Ethan looked around the diner one last time, his gaze lingering on the spot near the back where my mother used to sit and peel potatoes. "This place, it feels like a heartbeat again," he said quietly. "That's because of you." I wasn't sure if he meant me, the volunteers, or both, but the warmth in his voice left my pulse unsteady. They started toward the door, and I followed out of instinct rather than intention. The night had fallen cold and clear, the kind of deep winter dark that makes sound travel differently. Their car was parked under the street lamp, its headlights dimmed, waiting. Lucas opened the driver's side door, but before getting in, he turned back to me with a smile soft enough to feel like memory. "Emily," he said, "people who save you stay with you. You might not realize how much you gave us that night, but we never forgot." He didn't wait for my reply. He slipped into the car, leaving Ethan standing with me in the silence. The wind brushed strands of hair against my cheek, and I tucked them behind my ear, suddenly aware of how close he was. He stepped forward slightly enough that the lamplight caught the faint shadow along his jaw, the warmth in his eyes. I could feel something unspoken between us. Not romantic, not claimed, but quietly alive. "Today must have been overwhelming," he said. His voice was softer than I had heard it all day. I nodded. "That's one way to put it." He smiled barely. "We didn't come here to disrupt your life, only to give something back." "Something you deserve." I swallowed. I still don't know how to accept that. "You don't have to tonight. Just know that you're not alone anymore." He paused, his gaze searching mine with a depth that made my breath waver. "And this isn't goodbye, Emily." Something in the way he said my name made the air shift. Not heavy, not charged, just gentle. A promise hidden in the quiet. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words tangled. All I managed was a whisper. "Will I see you again?" Ethan's smile was small, but it held a warmth that touched something deep inside me. "Yes, you will." Then he stepped back, opening the passenger door. He didn't rush. He didn't look away. Not until he settled into the seat and the door closed with a soft click. The engine started, headlights flaring against the snow-dusted street. As the car pulled away, Ethan glanced back once through the window. Our eyes met across the dark. It wasn't longing. It wasn't regret. It was possibility, quiet and steady, waiting for its own time. I stood outside until their taillights disappeared around the bend. The night felt strangely bright, as if the cold had cleared a space inside me I didn't know was still blocked. When I finally stepped back into the diner, the earlier noise was gone, replaced by the intimate stillness of a place catching its breath. I walked to the counter, touched the folder again, and let a slow smile rise before I could stop it. Something had ended today, but something else had begun. I locked the diner door behind me, but for the first time in years, the sound of the bolt sliding into place didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a pause, a breath drawn before a new sentence. Inside, the lights glowed softly against the fresh paint and half-repaired fixtures, casting warm shadows that made the place look almost alive again. I walked slowly through the diner, touching the back of each booth the way my mother used to when she counted the spaces before a busy morning. The smell of dust and cleaner still lingered, but underneath it rose something else, something familiar. Hope. I stopped at the wall where the old photographs had hung for decades, the ones we had taken down earlier to clean. For years, I couldn't bring myself to touch that wall. Some part of me felt that if I moved anything, the memories would crumble. But now, the blank space didn't feel empty. It felt ready. Ready for new things. Ready for life to return. I picked up my mother's notebook from the counter, the one she used to write recipes in, along with grocery lists and occasional doodles of stray dogs she hoped to adopt someday. The edges were frayed, the ink fading, but her handwriting was still unmistakable. I flipped through the pages slowly, letting the familiar loops of her letters steady me. Near the back, pressed between two pages, I found something I hadn't noticed in years, a torn piece of paper folded twice. I opened it carefully. In my mother's handwriting were words she must have written long before she got sick. "One day, your kindness will come back to you. Maybe when you least expect it. Maybe when you need it most. But it will come back." I closed my eyes, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. She had believed in the power of small kindnesses. She lived it every day, and she had been right. I just never imagined the return would come in the form of two men walking through the snow after 20 years carrying a memory I thought the world had swallowed whole. I placed the note on the counter and looked around again. The diner wasn't just a building. It was a promise, a piece of history threaded with my mother's laughter, with every person she ever fed, with every moment she taught me how to see the world. And now it would have a future too. I walked to the front window, wiping a small circle in the fogged glass. The street outside was quiet snow gathering in soft piles under the street lamp. Somewhere out there, Ethan and Lucas were driving back to their hotel, planning things, thinking ahead, keeping their promise. A strange warmth spread through me. Not romantic, not defined, just a gentle spark I couldn't name, flickering in a place I thought had gone dim forever. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know what the diner would become, or how many mornings I would wake with doubt still tugging at me. But I knew I no longer faced it alone. Before turning off the lights, I whispered softly into the dim room the way I used to when my mother was alive. "We made it through today, Mom. And we're going to be okay." The words did not echo. They settled into the space as if the diner itself had been waiting to hear them. Tomorrow, the work would continue. New equipment would arrive, volunteers would come. Ethan and Lucas would return. And so would I. I placed my hand gently on the counter, letting the weight of the moment ground me. Then I reached for the front lights and switched them off, leaving the diner in a peaceful, expectant darkness. As I stepped into the cold night, locking the door behind me, I found myself thinking about something I had heard once, but never truly absorbed until now. If you have only one piece of bread left and you choose to share it, the world has a way of remembering. And sometimes, 20 years later, it knocks on your door. If you had only one piece of bread left, would you share it? And what would you do if someone came back for you decades later, not to take, but to give?